The topic of women doing martial arts in general has been a sliding scale that would shift from one end, that of women can't fight, to the other end, that of women can fight. And over the past 20 years or so, it has been sliding more towards the can fight end of the spectrum, thanks largely, I think, to MMA and its growing popularity, particularly with its female fighters. And this has even diverged into other traditionally stereotyped masculine trends as well, such as bodybuilding, or muscle mommies as women who do bodybuilding are known as. However, the one offshoot I want to look at is at the debate of should women participate in HEMA tournaments. And if you're not familiar with the term HEMA, that is a term used for historical European martial arts, or to be more exact, sword fighting styles that developed or are written down around the 14th century or so, at least traditionally. I have a personally different definition of that, but that's besides the point. So I'm not sure if this is whether it's due to many HEMA specialists with traditional backgrounds, or that the combat sport, in my opinion, is still trying to grow into mainstream popularity like its peers of previously mentioned MMA and kenjutsu as well. Yet, suffice it to say, it apparently still considered a contested point among some HEMA circles, from what I'm hearing. I first came across this issue specifically while fighting with a sword club. While many members of the club do teach and practice 14th century era weapons fighting, they also are welcoming and tend to diverge into other perspectives and styles as well. It made for great conversation, and it was during one of these chats where one of the co-founders who I spoke with the group, who was a woman, was telling me how there were still some people who feel that women can't sword fight, and that in some places this was still an issue. This despite the fact that I've seen many women across the state participate pretty actively in HEMA tournaments, not to mention others whom I follow online who do HEMA across the world, like places like Germany, Russia, and even as far as Central Asia. All of them seem to be very proficient in their chosen European styles, or even running their own schools. Some of them are even champions. For my part, I can see both sides to a degree. I fought women during fights who were clearly not used to direct combat with males, and gave off a vibe of hesitancy, I guess you can say. But at the same time, I've also fought women with zero signs of hesitancy whatsoever, being very aggressive and skillful as well, and having no qualms of getting into it with me, regardless of how big I was or what have you. The people who I've encountered who were pro-anti-female HEMA often presented the commonly used argument of biology, that men are naturally stronger than women and therefore could do some of the physical techniques often described in the sources because they did require a certain amount of strength and power to do. Others, though, have said that it's because it went against HEMA tradition. Women were not traditionally sword fighters in the 14th century era, and to bring them into a martial arts now was just basically woke modernism, feeding them ideas that they could somehow be equal, or dare I say even superior, to men in the real world of martial combat. I've heard similar arguments about women in other martial arts styles as well. Kenjutsu stands out the most to me because sword training is popular among both sexes in Japan, and it's very popular as well in the States to varying degrees. But again, historically, women wielding katanas or naginatas or participating in frontline battle was a rare occurrence if ever recorded. And as I mentioned naginatas, the one accepted idea of women in combat in feudal Japan was with naginatas or tantos or knives fighting to defend the castle. And like I just said, any records of women fighting in open battle are few and far between. Now, I've seen some HEMA tournaments take to following after their other martial peers and having separate divisions for female fighters, so as to avoid injury fighting heavier and stronger men. And I've been told to be wary when striking in fights when I'm fighting women as well. I've been told also that many women, some actually prefer fighting other women because it's just more comfortable to them. Now, here's the thing. Regarding any weapon-based martial arts, weapons are widely accepted as equalizers. A man may be stronger than a woman, but a stab to the face or the groin is still a stab to the face or the groin. And yes, the latter has happened to me on more than one occasion. Also, using weapons requires a degree of necessary skill. Now, I'm not saying that everyone needs to be a master swordsman or something like that, or have 60 cold bodies in the ground credited to their name, which, yes, by the way, that is a thing in many cultures and places. But equally, one cannot simply be relying on brute force alone to basically win the day or be impressive wielding some sort of weapon. Now, in my opinion, I found the difference between the two in that context lies not in historical sources or even biology, but in the mentality, their battle IQ. If someone, man or woman, enters into a fight believing themselves to be weaker or the inferior person, basically the body will make a way to find that conclusion happen, even if it's subconsciously. Likewise, someone that enters into a fight confident in themselves or their experience, and most importantly, I think, with a calm center, are often harder and trickier to fight because their battle IQ shoots up tremendously. They're less thinking about surviving the experience and more thinking about exploiting the weaknesses of the other person to its max effect and being aggressive in that. And besides, if one wants to argue the historical point, then by that same logic, no one is practicing HEMA correctly, because no one is dead or maimed for life or not wearing gear while wielding battle-ready weapons. Well, except for one HEMA school in South Korea that I read about, but that's the only one I know of. Nor are most of these schools doing all the techniques from the manuals that lead to these more lethal, life-changing outcomes, thereby making them just as sacrilegious as those clubs that encourage women to fight, if they're anti-women should fight in HEMA people. I think it's more about their ego, using logic and rationale to cover up that particular faction's own biases about how they feel about women being in the men's world, quote unquote, to begin with. Having said that, there are women fighters, like I said earlier, that do prefer fighting other women and training with them because of a perceived better understanding of the female mentality and experiences and exceptions that can be involved in that, thereby making swordsmanship easier for them to learn. Also, too, it's often thought that women tend to be actually more skilled in martial combat because of their perceived physical weakness, using their speed, maneuverability, and so on to make up the difference. And in many cases, it actually works. Speaking out of experience, at least. Now, as a man, I can't speak to that particular preference, except in a racial context, which even in that, while I think it's kind of close to the female experience in that kind of perception, it's obviously still different. Either way, though, honestly, I have no problem with women fighting in any martial art, and I've fought women in all martial arts that I've done over the last 35 years, as long as they know what they're getting themselves into and are prepared for it.